Okay, we're gonna get started. I wanted to say hello and welcome to our virtual training on how to maximize your workers' comp dollars. This training is brought to you today by LatinoBuilt and a partnership with Safe Build Alliance through a grant from Oregon OSHA. I'm Leanna Petrone and I'm the Executive Director of LatinoBuilt. This training is being recorded and will be distributed to our community following this presentation. Please make sure that your mic stays muted through the duration of the presentation unless instructed differently. For questions during the presentation, please ask them in the chat and they will be answered during the presentation or at the end of the presentation. I would now like to introduce David Walke, Small Business Ombudsman.
Hello, everybody. My name is Dave Walke. I'm the Small Business Ombudsman for Workers' Compensation. I work for the Department of Consumer and Business Services, and I am your workers' compensation resource and independent advocate for all things related to workers' compensation insurance. I want to share with you that as an independent advocate, when someone calls my office, all of our communications are confidential. So you can feel free to share any questions that you might have regarding your business and workers' compensation insurance. A little bit about my background. I've been in this position currently for 15 years. And prior to that, I worked for various workers' compensation insurance companies. And I also owned a business of which we had 6 employees. So I'm familiar with the employer side of dealing with running a business, having workers' comp insurance, and all the other complexities of operating a small business day to day. I actually currently have a partnership outside of my general day work with a CCD licensed contractor. We own a rental together. So I also have that perspective from a CCD licensed contractor of their day-to-day challenges. So I'm going to share some slides with you today that I hope you'll find helpful. And if we could go to the top 5 questions asked by construction contractors slide. And the next one. Okay. So in my day-to-day interactions with businesses, and we do work a lot with construction contractors, here are some of the common questions that we get. Number 1, do I even need to buy workers' compensation insurance? And if I do need to buy workers' comp insurance, how do I buy it? What's the process? And then how much is it going to cost? Is this going to be too expensive? Maybe I shouldn't hire employees because it's going to be such a high expense item. And what if I don't need workers' comp insurance based on Oregon law, but my primary contractor or the general contractor requires that I have workers' comp? So we'll have a little discussion about that. And finally, if I am a sole proprietor commercial contractor under a CCD license, am I required to have coverage, workers' comp coverage on myself? And if so, what do I do? So let's go to the next slide. So workers' comp insurance, do I need it? The number 1 question is, do you have employees? If you have employees, you need workers' comp insurance. And that includes even that occasional day laborer that you might have help you out or assist you on a particular day that you need extra help. And even if you pay cash for that day laborer, under CCD licensure laws, you still are required to have workers' comp insurance. If you are, say, a sole proprietor and you don't have any employees, but you do need extra help and you go through a temp agency such as Labor Ready to get workers' comp or to get temporary help, in that instance, you don't need workers' comp insurance because Labor Ready will provide the workers' comp insurance for that temporary employee. You just have to make sure that whatever temp agency that you use, that they have current workers' comp coverage. So what you want to do when you are working with a temp agency is ask for a certificate of insurance that shows the workers' comp insurance that they have for their staff that they are providing to you on a temporary basis. I am a sole proprietor and I have no employees. Do I need workers' comp? Under most circumstances, no, you do not need workers' comp insurance. But we'll go into an exception a little later in the slide. I am an LLC member. I have 5 LLC members, and none of them are family members. So you just have 5 independent folks that you have partnered up with for your LLC. Do I need workers' comp? And yes, you do. Under our statute, you can only exclude 2 LLC members from coverage. So in this instance, with an LLC with 5 LLC members, you could have 2 LLC members not covered on the policy, but you would have to cover the other 3 LLC members for workers' comp coverage. If all of the LLC members are all brothers, you are not required to have workers' comp. But if they're non-related, you only can exclude two of the LLC members in this example. So can we go to the next slide? So what's the process for buying workers' comp insurance? We get this question a lot now that the business or the entrepreneur knows that they need to buy workers' comp insurance. The first thing that we advise folks when we get that question is find a good independent insurance agent. I can't tell you the number of times where we've had people calling our office and they're in trouble, and they wouldn't have gotten into trouble if they'd had a good independent insurance agent at their side to help them. So if you were to call our office and maybe even ask for a recommendation, we could provide some recommendations that would be close to your location that we think that would serve you appropriately for your insurance needs, particularly in the workers' comp group. For those do-it-yourselfers, you can get workers' comp insurance on a direct basis. SAIF, S-A-I-F, State Accident Insurance Fund, is the largest workers' comp insurer in Oregon, and they do allow direct access to their market. So you could contact SAIF and ask for a quote and get coverage that way. There are some other markets out there too that allow direct access. And one thing I want to also say though about the independent insurance agency route is it's not going to cost you any more to go through an independent insurance agent than if you'd gone direct to SAIF or other markets. If you find that you're unable to get coverage, directly with SAIF or any other market, your independent insurance agent or you can then apply to the Oregon Assigned Risk Market. The Oregon Assigned Risk Market is kind of the backstop. If you're unable to get coverage traditionally, then you can apply to the Assigned Risk Market knowing that these are the highest rates in Oregon. So you want to see if you can avoid getting your insurance through the Assigned Risk Market. Another way to get workers' comp insurance is through something called a PEO or employee leasing, PEO stands for Professional Employer Organizations. And these are independent parties where you enter into a contract with them and you essentially turn your employees over to the employee leasing company and you lease them back. The PEO or employee leasing company in turn provides you with a cafeteria of benefits, which includes workers' comp insurance. It could include a 401k plan, health insurance. Of course, you're all going to pay for the privilege of getting these services, but for some, it's kind of a good one-stop shopping experience to be able to access these types of benefits that generally just larger companies can get. And so PEOs combining through power of large numbers, they have a number of different clients that they bundle together. They're able to get benefits maybe at a lesser rate than you could get independently. So let's go to the next slide. So how much is workers' comp going to cost? So there is a classification system in Oregon, and this is true in every other state, where there are over 600 different industrial classifications that cover every type of occupation that we have here in Oregon. And each one of those classifications has a unique rate that reflects the hazards of that classification. So you can imagine that a bookkeeper classification would have a lower rate than a roofing classification. And so there's everything in between. So depending on what type of classification that you have, you know, if you are a roofer versus a painter, the painting classification would have a lower rate. So you pay less workers' comp premium than if you were a roofing type of business. So that rate is applied against payroll. So the more payroll you have, the higher your premium is going to be. So obviously, if you have 20 employees, your payroll is going to be a lot higher than if you have 10 employees, and you'd be paying commensurately a higher amount of premium the more employees that you have, because you have more payroll. There's something called an experience modification, which is something your business earns over time. And experience modification is a factor that's applied against your premium, which reflects the number of claims that your business has compared to the average business of your type and size. So you can imagine that there are roofers that have poor loss experience and roofers that have good loss experience. The ones with good loss experience would have a credit experience modification, so their premium would be less than the roofer that had more claims than average. We talked a little bit about voluntary or assigned risk market, and so your costs are going to be much higher in the assigned risk market than it would be in the voluntary market. Voluntary market is the traditional market that you would hope to be in, and your rates are going to be cheaper than if you had to go in the assigned risk market if you were unable to get coverage in the voluntary market. One thing for particularly construction contractors to be aware of is your costs could go up, and it could be a surprise to you at the end of your policy period, where the insurance company will ask you for a list of subcontractors that you use. And when you list those subcontractors to the insurance company, they're going to determine whether those subcontractors have a CCD license or not. If they do not have a CCD license, they're likely to charge you for whatever money that you paid to those unlicensed subcontractors. So you want to make sure that you use, if you're going to use a subcontractor, to use licensed CCD subcontractors, so you don't get caught up in having to pay for unlicensed subcontractors under your workers' comp policy. We've had to work, I've had a lot of cases where we had this type of situation involved, and it can add tens of thousands of dollars to your workers' comp premium unknowingly. Can we go to the next slide? So what if I'm not required to have coverage? So you were a sole proprietor in this example with no employees, but in order to get a contract with this particular general or primary contract, they say you have to have workers' comp insurance. So despite the fact that the state of Oregon says you don't have to have coverage, it's not illegal to make that a condition of the contract. So we have a way for, a relatively inexpensive way for a sole proprietor in that situation to comply with that condition of the contract, and that is to purchase an if any workers' comp policy, which generally costs between $500 and $600 per year. And you would apply for an if any policy through the assigned risk plan. I'm going to give you the website and the phone number for which you can get information about the if any policy. And that would be enough to satisfy that condition of the contract. And so we've gotten this question quite a bit because getting workers' comp insurance on yourself can be very expensive. The F&E policy does not provide coverage for you, the sole proprietor. It just covers any exposure that you might have on your policy other than yourself. So anybody that, let's say, a subcontractor or your brother that might be helping you out on a particular day, that if any policy would serve to provide that coverage if there happened to be a claim. So it's a relatively inexpensive way to get workers' comp coverage and satisfy that condition of a contract should a general or primary contractor require it. And then the good news is that at the end of the policy year for if any policy, the insurance company is going to send you a payroll report. If you didn't have any payroll for that year, you just write 0 on it and send it back to the insurance company, and you'll get a portion of your money back, generally a couple of $100s. So your net cost for that if any policy might be in the neighborhood of $400. Next slide, please. So another CCE requirement that that's out there for workers' comp insurance is that if you are, say, a sole proprietor, exempt commercial contractor, which means you don't have any employees, CCE requires you to have personal election coverage. And personal election coverage, again, is workers' comp coverage on the owner of the business. And it can be very expensive. So an alternative to that we have recommended to many of the commercial contractors in this situation is go back to CCB, change your status from non-exempt to exempt, and purchase an F&E policy, that same policy we talked about in the previous slide. And that would make you in compliance with the CCB with regards to that requirement. Next slide. So that's the end of my presentation. We have, here's my contact information. My cell phone is 971-283-0997. And my associate, Caitlin Brightbot's contact information is there too. So there's a question is, what if I am an LLC with 3 members and one of the members is seriously injured on a job site? Who covers the medical and lost time, and can I get sued by the injured member for not having coverage? So we talked about that example of 5 LLC members and that you could only exclude 2. So let's just use this example. So you have 3 LLC members, unrelated. You exclude Joe, John, and Jack. So Joe and John are the 2 LLC members that you have excluded off of the policy. The third member, Jack, is the one that gets hurt. So the workers' comp policy is out there that's providing coverage for Jack, and if he got hurt, then the workers' comp policy would respond, and they provide lost time benefits and medical treatment costs. If the LLC member was one of the ones that were excluded from coverage, then they are not entitled to any workers' comp coverage. So whatever other their health insurance, or if they have disability insurance, those would be the types of insurance that would have to respond in that case. So there would be no coverage for two of the members and coverage for the one designated member that they've decided to make an employee for purposes of workers' comp.
Do we have any more questions before we move on to the next presentation?
Okay, thank you for your time.
Great, thank you. We're going to move on to Matt. And Matt West, he's the Employment Services Team Manager and Acting Operations Section Manager at the Workers' Compensation Division.
Hello, so I'm Matt, and I'm currently the manager of a couple of return to work programs that the state of Oregon offers. So I'm part of the state workers' compensation division. We're not part of Safe Corporation or any insurance carrier. We're actually the regulatory agency for the workers' compensation system. And one small piece of the workers' compensation system is return to work, getting workers back to work after an on-the-job injury. And Oregon actually has some of the best return to work programs in the country. We often have other states calling and asking, getting information about our programs, how we run our programs, how they're funded and all that. So we're pretty lucky here to have these programs. And the purpose is to, one, help lower the cost for the employer to bring an injured worker back to work. And then two, to get the worker back to work as soon as possible and as safely as possible, and have them working and as productive as possible after an on-the-job injury. So I'm going to talk about the two different programs, how they work, and all that. So we want to go to the next slide, please. So first, the programs, how they're funded. We get this question a lot because, as you'll find out, there are quite a bit of benefits and money that's spent on these programs. So there's a fund called the Worker Benefit Fund, and every employer and worker in the state of Oregon contributes to this fund. So the current rate is 2.2 cents per hour. So for every hour that a person works, 2.2 cents goes to this fund to help fund these programs. And usually it's divided half from the worker and half from the employer. So it'd be 1.1 cent out of the worker's pay would be taken out, and then 1.1 cent the employer would contribute. So it goes into this fund that helps fund these programs, among other things. The fund is responsible for other programs as well. Okay, next slide. So the two programs that I want to talk about are called the Employer Injury Program and the Preferred Worker Program. They're similar in nature, but can be used at different times. So the Employer Injury Program encourages early return to work of injured workers, and it's available as soon as a worker gets injured and has any sort of work release. And it's the purpose of the Employer Injury Program is to get that worker working on light duty as soon as possible, and while they have temporary restrictions. Now, the majority of workers that get injured on the job end up with a regular work release and can go back to their regular work. For those workers that have a more severe injury and end up with permanent restrictions, they would qualify for the Preferred Worker Program, which helps get those workers back to permanent modified work, either with the employer at injury or the benefits can be used with a new employer as well. And I'll get into each program a little bit more here. Next slide, please. So the employer injury program is that first program I mentioned. Like I said, it's available as soon as the claim is open. Even prior to the claim being accepted or denied, the employer can take advantage of this program. It helps get workers back to work faster. It'll help you lower your claims costs, and it helps keep workers working and productive. The way that it helps lower the claims cost is, if a worker is back at work doing some sort of light duty job while they're receiving treatment and getting better, they're not sitting at home just collecting time loss. One of the largest, some big costs on a claim, some of the major costs is time loss. So bringing a worker back, having them productive, not only helps you in areas that you need the productivity, but also helps keep the cost for time loss down. There's also studies that show that workers that are back to work on light duty and being productive, it helps promote healing and actually lowers the medical costs on the claim as well. So next slide, please. So what's available through the employer injury program? So for the employer, there's a wage subsidy. So our program will reimburse you 50% of the worker's gross wages for up to 66 days while they're on light duty. So not only are you lowering your claims costs by bringing them back to work and then not sitting at home getting time loss, but we're also going to subsidize those wages. So for up to 66 days while they're on modified duty, performing their light duty, you pay them their full wage, and then we'll reimburse you half of that. And that's a reimbursement that you would get just for them working. So you're going to pay them anyway. This is it's a return to kind of help lower the cost to bring them back. There's clothing available for the worker. A lot of people ask, why would we buy the worker's clothing? Well, let's say that you have a worker who works out in a warehouse or is works on a construction site, and for their light duty job, you're going to bring them into the office. Maybe they're going to talk to customers. They might require different type of clothing. Maybe you want them to wear nicer clothes that they wouldn't have worn out in the shop or in a construction site. So we want to help with that cost and provide the worker with clothing for the job. There's tools and equipment, and also another category called worksite modification. So let's say, so this is up to $5,000, and it's any equipment that you need to create or modify for that worker to do their job. One example would be you bring a worker in. Let's say you have some data entry that needs to be done, and that can be done it's a good light duty job, but you don't have an extra computer for them to use or a desk and a chair for them to sit in. You could use this $5,000 pot of money to buy the computer, the desk, the chair, and to set up that light duty workstation. And then now you have the station for them to perform that job. Any equipment purchased under these categories becomes property of the employer. And the thought is that hopefully that worker heals, is able to go back to their normal job, and now you have a setup station for if you have an injury in the future and need another light duty job, you can quickly put somebody into that light duty job. There's also tuition, books, and fees available up to $1,000. So if a worker needed some sort of training, some software training, or you needed to get some sort of license or give them a class or have them take a class so that they can learn a new skill to perform during their light duty job, we have funds available to help with that. Next slide, please. So suggestions, and I'm just giving a real quick overview. So if you have any questions, please let me know. But some suggestions to successfully use the program. The sooner you can identify light duty jobs, the better. So if you, prior to an injury, already have an idea of some light duty jobs that somebody could do, maybe they're lower priority tasks that you just don't have the capacity to do right now. If you identify those early and identify the type of equipment and things that you need, then the worker can slide into that job quicker. You can purchase the equipment and get reimbursed, and it'll just lower the time that the worker's sitting at home. So early identification of jobs is important. You can encourage the use of the program to offset other costs. Like I said, we're going to reimburse you half of the worker's wages, that money comes back to you as the employer, and you can do whatever you want with it. So if you're losing productivity in an area where the worker's normally at, you could use some of the wage subsidy reimbursement wages to hire a temp, or to help offset the costs and loss of productivity. Some employers have used the money that they get reimbursed from the program to fund their safety programs or to purchase other equipment that they need. It's some extra money that could be used however the employer sees fit. Let's go to the next slide. So that was the employer injury program, and so that program, like I said, is used from the time that a worker is injured up until the time that they are either released to regular work or end up with permanent restrictions. So for those workers that end up with permanent restrictions, if those restrictions prevent them from returning back to their regular job 100%, then they would qualify for the preferred worker program. And when we do an eligibility for the preferred worker program, we look at the medical documentation that the doctor provides, stating what those permanent restrictions are. So it's based off of medical reports. Let's go to the next slide. So similar to the employer injury program, there's a number of benefits available. There's some of the benefits are more advantageous for the employer. It's more of an employer benefit, and then some of the benefits are more for the worker. The main employer benefits is if you hire a preferred worker, or you bring back one of your own injured workers to permanent modified work and they qualify for the preferred worker program, you can qualify for what's called premium exemption. And that means for the first 3 years, you don't have to pay workers' compensation premiums on that worker. So basically it's a discount on your workers' compensation insurance. As Dave mentioned earlier, one of the things that's one of the components that goes into calculating an employer's insurance premium is their payroll. So any preferred worker during this premium exemption period, their payroll cannot be used in that calculation of the workers' comp rate. So you save a little bit of money on your workers' comp insurance. You're also eligible for what's called claims cost reimbursement. And that means for that same 3-year premium exemption period, if that worker suffers a new on-the-job injury, the preferred worker program will cover all the claims costs for that claim. We pay for all the medical, all the time loss, any permanent disability, and by law, the insurance carrier cannot use that claim to raise your rates or to affect your rates. So for insurance purposes, it's like the claim never happened. We refer to it sometimes as the worker with a 3-year warranty. They could get injured multiple times during that 3-year period, and your workers' comp rates would stay the same. Your insurance carrier will process the claim like any other claim, but in the end, they send us a bill, and we reimburse them all those costs along with any costs that they would normally charge for processing the claim. For the preferred worker program, there's also a wage subsidy benefit, and that is 50% of the worker's gross wages for 6 months. So, you bring a worker back to permanent modified duty, or you hire a preferred worker, we'll reimburse you half of their wages for 6 months. And that's just a cash incentive for employers to bring back a worker with permanent restrictions or hire somebody who's been injured somewhere else. Next slide, please. So like the employer injury program, there's clothing available, up to $500 for clothing. There's up to $2,500 for tools and equipment. And in this case, it would be an example of any tools or equipment that the worker needs to start that job. So if they were hired to work for a construction company and they need their own, tool belts and hand tools, maybe some saws, level, depending on what they're doing, we can use that $2,500 to purchase those tools, and those tools become property of the worker. There's, like the employer injury program, there's also a training benefit up to $1,000 for us to pay for any training that the worker might need to perform the new job. Next slide, please. Another couple of benefits. These are some big ones. There's worksite creation. It's up to $5,000. If you are hiring a preferred worker or bringing a preferred worker back to permanent modified duty in a brand new position, so you're not hiring someone to fill a vacancy, but you're actually adding a new position to your company, then we can pay up to $5,000 to create that work site. Some examples of that would be, let's say, business is going really well and you decide that you need a delivery driver to deliver some of your product. We could pay $5,000 for a van or help pay towards the purchase of a van for that worker to use to deliver, product. It can be really anything. We've built offices, they've hired a new worker and needed a desk and a chair and a computer and a phone line and all that. So that's what that $5,000 can be used for. And then worksite modification is kind of the last benefit I want to touch on. It's up to $35,000. And that is modifying the worksite or the job so that the worker can work within their permanent restrictions. So every one of these workers is going to have a different injury, different restrictions. So they, depending on what the job, they might have there might be parts of that job that are outside of those restrictions. If they have a lifting restriction or a climbing restriction. So we have worksite modification consultants that would come out and meet with the employer and the worker at the job site, look at the job tasks, look at the restrictions, and look at purchasing equipment to help overcome the restrictions. These pictures that are down here, the one in the middle, there was a worker with a shoulder injury and he had to do some maintenance on motorhomes, and he had a shoulder injury, so he couldn't get down on the ground. So we were able to purchase these lifts so we could lift the vehicle up to a higher amount so the worker could, or higher level, so the worker could perform the job without having to crawl on the ground and putting that weight on their shoulder. The tailgate to the far right is it's a lift gate. That gate goes all the way to the ground. You can roll things onto the gate, raise it up, and then slide them into the truck for things that are, that can't be lifted, that are outside the worker's lifting restrictions. Let's go to the next slide. So here's an example of what it would look like. An employer, and this is a real example, an employer in the Portland area, roofing company, they had a worker who, a couple of things, he couldn't, they hired this worker to sort of clean up the debris and things that, when they were tearing off an old roof. So the normal process is they would tear it off and it would fall on the ground, and then the worker's job was to pick it all up and throw it into a trailer. We had a shoulder injury and a back injury, and he couldn't, repetitively bend and pick up things, even if they put them on tarps or things like that. They were just too heavy. So we were able to purchase this. It's called an equipter. As you can see, it's a little dump trailer that raises up to the level of the roof. The roofers are able to toss the debris straight into that. The worker operates it, lowers it, drives it off to dump it, brings it back, raises it up, and they do it all over again. It helps eliminate that bending and lifting of the debris from the ground. This employer also took advantage of the premium exemption. We reimbursed the employer 50% of the worker's wages for 6 months. We bought the worker some clothing. He also needed some tools for the job, and then we provided some training. I believe we paid to have someone train him on how to operate this piece of equipment. So that's just an example of an employer taking advantage of multiple categories of the program. Let's go to the next slide. Yeah, so our offices, if you have specific information about either program, we have 2 different email inboxes, one for the employer injury program, one for the preferred worker program. If you prefer to speak to somebody, that's our toll-free line. We have someone manning or operating that phone line every day. And then there's my contact information. That's my direct line and my email. I can answer any questions related to either of the programs, or I can direct you to someone else that can answer them as well. So looks like there's a couple of questions here. So you answered that one, right? Does workers' compensation insurance cover, oh, there we go. Does workers' comp insurance cover an employee who has been sent home to quarantine because of exposure to COVID? And if the employee becomes sick with COVID, is that covered under workers' comp? So that's a good question. And as you can imagine, we've gotten that question a lot. One of the areas that I manage is the benefit consultation unit, and they answer our 1-800 line for any just general workers' comp questions. So it's kind of a, I guess in order for workers' comp to cover, the worker would need to file a claim with their workers' comp insurance carrier, and then the insurer has 60 days to investigate that claim. And so in workers' comp, it's up to the worker to show that the injury, or in this case, the exposure to COVID-19, is work-related. So currently, we've received over 300. There's been over 300 claims filed, and a lot of them have been accepted. The large majority have been accepted, especially specifically in the healthcare industry. So one of the things with workers' comp is your injury or exposure to the disease has to be in what's called the course and scope of employment, meaning as part of your job, you were exposed. So for nurses, medical assistants, those working in hospitals, their job is directly related with treating people that may have COVID. So those workers, it's very easy for them to prove or show that more than likely they were exposed at work. If I'm sitting in my office doing my job, my job doesn't deal directly with people that have COVID, but one of my coworkers brings it in. I could still file a claim, but it would be up to the insurer to accept or deny that claim. They would have to kind of answer that question of, did I get it doing my job, or did I just happen to get it while I'm at work? That makes sense. So I would say, grocery workers that are dealing with a lot of the public, people that are really dealing with a lot of people in the public right now, they have a higher likelihood that they're going to get exposed. So their injury would more than likely, or their claim would more than likely be accepted. If their claim is accepted, or even prior to acceptance, like I said, the insurer has 60 days to accept or deny the claim. If the doctor takes the person off of work, if they miss more than 3 days of work, then the workers' comp insurance carrier would have to pay time loss up till the date that they're either released back to work, or up until the claim is denied, if it ends up being denied. So there's a lot of nuances to how claims are processed. That's kind of it in a nutshell. And I think I answered the second part of that question. If they become sick with COVID, is it covered in workers' comp? So it would be the same if they can file a claim, if it's related to their job, if they're missing work and it's authorized by the doctor, then the insurance carrier would pay time loss up until the date of either denial or until they had a release to go back to work if the claim's accepted. Then the last one, do subsequent injuries of a worker using the employer injury program affect your experience modification? That's a great question. If it's the employer injury program, then yes, it would be a new claim. The employer injury program doesn't have that premium exemption piece. So if it's that first program where they're on temporary light duty, any new claim would affect your experience mod. But the preferred worker program, if you hire a preferred worker and they have that 3 years of premium exemption, during that 3-year claims cost reimbursement period, those claims can't be used they don't affect their experience mod. And I would add to that if you are in that situation, because we've come across it, where an employer is under that premium exemption period, they have their preferred worker gets hurt, files a claim, and next thing you know, their rates start to go up. They can contact our office. We've worked directly with Dave's office. He can get involved and call the insurer and help fix that, because legally they're not allowed to do that. So he's called insurers and had them change that and that filing with the NCCI to help resolve that. Are there any other questions?
Great. Well, I think we have all of the questions asked and answered. And thank you very much to David and Matt. Very useful information. I wanted to thank Safe Build Alliance for our partnership going forward. Also, we would love to connect with you if you need any more information. We also have some handouts to distribute as well, and documents in English and Spanish. Our website is an excellent resource, but also we have a specific safety website at latinobuilt.org/safety. There you will find bilingual resources of every type for the construction industry in Spanish and English. Please follow us or like us on Facebook and on LinkedIn. Soon sign up for our newsletter, and please subscribe to our channel on YouTube. We're having a promotion right now, and we have some LatinoBuilt masks for to wear around to keep you safe. That for the first 25 people who follow our channel. So we'll be happy to bring those out. And again, thank you all for attending. Please contact us if you need us. Thank you.